Hello. So for my presentation, I chose to focus on Uganda and how development really needs to change in order to improve the conditions for women in the country. And I based this project on a variety of sources, including books and articles, but also friends that I have from the Ugandan area. So as we start, I'm going to give you a few background and a little bit of background and statistics on the country. Uganda has a population of at least 39,570,125 people. We estimate that's actually a little ways off. It's probably closer to 41 million people, with the female population making up at least 50.26% of that number. There's a wide variety of ethnic groups that make up the population, with English being the official language of Uganda. However, there are some other dialects which are taught, but English is the one that's primarily taught in the school system. With a religious background made up of 45.1% Protestant, 39.3% Catholic, 13.7% Muslim, and 1.6% of a variety of others, including people who don't practice. The Muslim number is growing with the influx of refugees from different countries. And this is because Uganda often acts as a host country for refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Rwanda, and other nearby countries that have often had ongoing conflict. There is a development lag in the north and northwestern regions of Uganda, and this is primarily due to long-term conflict such as the Lord's Resistance Army and the Ugandan Bush Wars, which took place from 1981 to 1986. And all of these things have increased the violence against women in the country and the lag in economic security. The current president is Yoweri Museveni, and he has been in power since 1986. He was quite popular in the West for quite some time due to certain policies he implemented and different things he believed in, such as encouraging higher education for women and affirmative action. But it has been in a steady decline for the last several years due to his stance on homosexuality, the involvement in the war in Congo, the lack of action in dealing with the Lord's Resistance Army. And then most recently, what has occurred is that he has imposed a lack of term limits and the presidential age limit, most recently in 2017, which was actually just passed quite recently. He made it so that he could stay president for quite a much longer time. In the 2016 election, there was widespread fraud and election rigging, voter intimidation tactics, and arrests of his political opposition, which has made him very unpopular with the younger constituents who really aren't taking quite an active role yet, unfortunately, because there are quite a few people with very good ideas living in Uganda right now. They're just not really being allowed to speak up because President Museveni has basically a lock on the country. And that is information that I have gotten from several friends who actually live in Uganda. It's unfortunate, but it is what is happening right now, where they just can't really get anyone who can oust him from office, as it were, especially with the new presidential age limit. And Museveni is, I want to say, 75 right now, so he's just getting older. The level of development and the challenges that Uganda faces. There has been a great deal of development in terms of women's rights in Uganda. For instance, the affirmative action programs, a female vice president, there is a greater number of women pursuing higher education than ever before. The 2010 passage of the Domestic Violence Act and the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act both occurred in 2010. And then in 2012, the Marriage and Divorce Bill, which allowed for a minimum age of marriage to be 18. Women were granted the right to choose their own spouse. They were granted the right to divorce their spouse for cruelty. It prohibits the practice of widow inheritance, otherwise known as the leveret, where if a man dies, his brother can basically take on his wife. And it provides for the equitable distribution of property in the instance of a divorce. It supposedly provides for the equitable distribution of property in a divorce. However, for all the development in women's rights in Uganda, there are many challenges which are being faced on a daily basis. In the Marriage and Divorce Bill, in rural areas where there is a lack of law enforcement, marriages are still frequently arranged for minors under the age of 18. Polygamy is authorized under customary and Islamic laws. And in the bill, women are required to show that not only was adultery committed by their husband, but they must also provide evidence of bigamy, sodomy, rape, or desertion in order to get a divorce. While this fact has been declared unconstitutional, the laws haven't been reformed to essentially back up the unconstitutionality of this. With ownership and division of property, women traditionally do the majority of the work on the land. However, it is estimated that women only own 7% of the land in Uganda right now. Additionally, there are discriminatory laws governing inheritance which exclude women from land ownership, such as the Succession Act, where property is apportioned to each member of the family in the event of the man's death, and widows can only inherit up to 15% of it, and women cannot inherit their father's property at all. The land ownership, because of the current Succession Act, land ownership has a huge bearing on a woman's capacity to become economically independent in Uganda, which can really affect her ability to provide for her family and her children and everything else, which can also be where a lot of the underage marriages occur because women cannot provide for their children in the event of their husband's death. With affirmative action, women are represented in parliament. What affirmative action is in Uganda is that there are so many seats set aside out of each region for women, and they're seats that are reserved strictly for women. A man cannot hold them. As of right now, 116 women sit in parliament out of 375 seats. This has been a very good thing, but many people believe that the affirmative action system needs to be reformed drastically. According to Ms. Amangi Ongom, the chair of the Women Parliamentary Association, women are getting stuck in affirmative action seats, and the number of women in directly elected seats is decreasing, which basically means that the only women who are in parliament are the ones who are needed to fill the seats, not necessarily women who have been democratically elected by the people. So this is a rapidly evolving concept in Uganda of change that needs to occur. In my opinion, the WID, or Women in Development, is the feminist theory that has really taken a leading role in Uganda. And truthfully, providing women with an income with which they can contribute and take care of their family is a very noble idea. However, this income is dependent upon a variety of factors, many of which are not sustainable. And sustainability is, after all, what every piece of foreign aid or development has to have in order to actually be considered working. For instance, how many times have we seen African handbags or jewelry made by women who sell handmade items for an income here in the United States? We've all seen this and probably even bought some of them, congratulating ourselves on our philanthropy and the acquisition of a unique handmade item. However, the question becomes, like in any sales enterprise, how sustainable is this when the demand disappears and a new hot item takes its place? The reality of WID, in my opinion, is that it's a band-aid measure, a temporary stopgap that is not meant to be a permanent fix, but rather help in the moment. In order for true change to occur, we really need to find something that's sustainable. And it's a lot of that has to do with getting women in an active role in the country. In reading different articles and talking to friends from Uganda and reading books such as Dead Aid, which I highly, highly recommend to anyone who's thinking about going into development, because this Dambisa Moyo is brilliant when it comes to talking about how aid is really not working in a way that is sustainable. I have come to believe that for aid to be truly effective, it really needs a massive overhaul. Since the 1940s, approximately $1 trillion in aid has been transferred from rich countries around the world to Africa, and yet conditions really haven't improved in a sustainable way. One of these reasons, I believe, is the influx of foreign aid. In the 1940s, we had the Marshall Plan in Europe, which is considered very highly successful, but the Marshall Plan was a short injection of cash into countries that already had functioning governments and societies. Much of Africa has received aid continuously for over 50 years, and I think that's one of the problems, in that, unlike the Marshall Plan, there isn't an inbuilt threat that the aid will stop to Africa from foreign communities or from the international community. African governments, including Uganda, view aid as a permanent and reliable source of income. And so they're not trying to formulate their own industries or anything else, because they've come to count on international foreign aid as a part of basically their governmental budget. Another reason that I think aid probably isn't really working is that there are often quid pro quo conditionalities which are placed on the receipt of aid from NGOs or private donors, and they have to spend it on specific goods and services, despite that what these NGOs are focused on might not actually be the best fit for the country and or the region where this is going. A good example of this could be seen in the NGO Play Pump International, which has since gone out of business. They installed pumps in the community based on basically the merry-go-rounds. So when children would get on them and play and, you know, go around and around and around on the merry-go-round, they would be bringing up water. It's a beautiful idea in theory and wonderful because it's kids are going to play, and why not give them equipment to play on that serves a dual purpose. However, 2 years after they were installed, the pumps were abandoned and broken and found to be completely unmaintained. The villages were not asked or consulted prior to these pumps being installed, and once they were installed, they replaced the hand pumps that had worked for them, and didn't really leave the citizens with a lot of action because they hadn't been trained on how to maintain these pumps or to fix them in the instance that they broke down. Another problem I believe that really affects it is that these NGOs and a great deal of this comes from my conversations with my friends in Uganda. These NGOs choose to employ their own citizens, which makes a certain amount of sense because you want to send the people who are most qualified over. But at the end of the day, these people really don't understand the culture that they're going into. How to make foreign aid work in Uganda to the benefit of the women and to help improve their conditions. Many women in Uganda feel like the aid is being misspent. In Moyo's book, Dead Aid, he says that aid effectiveness should be measured against its contributions to long-term sustainable growth and whether it moves the greatest number of people out of poverty in a sustainable way. When seen through this lens, aid is found wanting. Which is very true, because at the end of the day, if the growth and the effectiveness is not sustainable, you really cannot consider that the aid has been effective and has helped move people out of poverty, which is something that my friends from Uganda have told me, that it's these NGOs come in, or mission groups or churches or whatever come in, but they're there for a short period and they try to do things a certain way. I believe that several steps need to occur for foreign aid to be truly effective and, more importantly, sustainable. The first being, we as an international community really need to step back. Instead of having people be placed there in a permanent situation, we need to send qualified individuals on a temporary assignment, with the basis of their assignment being to train local individuals who are suitable candidates for the positions that they are currently occupying. And a large part of that is, if you're working in a domestic violence against women situation, okay, you can send a man, and that might be acceptable here in the United States. But in Africa, with the way things work, you need a woman to do the counseling or to set certain things up. And part of that is, not only do you have someone local, but you also have someone who understands the culture and the social dynamics of Uganda very well. And this is not only something that I believe is pertinent for Uganda, but truly pertinent for the rest of the developing countries that are receiving foreign aid right now. Something that has been discussed is that the laws need to be urgently adopted. such as the Marriage and Divorce Bill and the Domestic Violence Act, which have not really been adopted yet. They've been put into law, but the laws haven't been adopted, and so there's a time lag in how it's working. In order to assist in the violence perpetrated against women, NGOs need to help with ensuring women's access to the justice system. In Uganda particularly, a major barrier to the access for justice is police inaction, the distance and cost in traveling to police stations and courts, especially for the women who are in the rural community or in the bush, and things happen and they really have no one to assist them with making the commute and understanding the court systems and everything else, especially if they really haven't received an education where they would understand that. The delays and the corruption inherent in making a formal complaint, many things have to be done, and many times people just aren't equipped. Another thing is that for a case to be tried in court, it has to be a government-appointed doctor or at least a police sergeant. This is a problem and cause for concern because there is a lack of training for doctors who are willing to testify in the courts on medical violence cases. And most of the time they don't have the training necessary to understand how to testify in court or help the victim out of the problems in the court system. So there's a lack of training there. And additionally, the lack of shelters available in the country. Here in the United States, we have shelters where women in crisis can go and receive help to get started again, assistance with the legalities of getting their children away, of finding a place to live, of finding employment if they didn't have it, counseling, medical assistance, just a one-stop shop. And that's been a big part of the problem in Africa and Uganda, is that once the complaint has been made, there's really no safe place for the women to go. If we as an international community would spend more time working with the local Ugandan communities or African communities with the training, both for the first responders and the support personnel in a style such as, for example, DVIS or domestic violence intervention services, then what needs to occur for helping these women get back on their feet actually could occur. And a good place to start for that is we already send teams of doctors over there. The WHO goes over, medical missions teams go over. They go over and they give inoculations. They do quite a few things, but what they don't do is also teach the local doctors and medical personnel what it means to assist with domestic violence and how to assist in making your case in a court of law, and everything that is actually taught here in America in medical school. And so a big part of that is something I do believe we need to change. And a great deal of the problems which occur with NGOs, at least according to my friends in Uganda, is that there is a lack of understanding about the country and the culture. Americans go over there and try to implement American society because we believe we are superior. And instinctively, that's what we've been taught to believe since we were children. But Whereas what needs to actually occur is that when Americans with the training go there, they provide training to the local people, the local community. They find people who are actually qualified to provide these services in Uganda. And then the United States, the Americans need to leave, because at that point they've created something that is more sustainable. And there have been instances where sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of that is that there has to be a sustainable practice with the NGO, but also with the government, whereas the government needs to be able to take ownership of the solution and find different ways to do things. While there will always be conditionalities on foreign aid, I do believe that the United States needs to stop looking at what's best for them and start attempting to make these countries independent, because ultimately that is going to be what is best for the country, or for Uganda, either Uganda or any other country in Africa, and the economy for the United States. When you look at the facts of how much money is going into Africa, there isn't really any progress that's being made. It's more like we just keep throwing money at a problem, and the problem isn't actually getting any better or going away. An example of this is something that's happening in Uganda, and I spoke about this in one of my discussion points. We have a tariff going on right now, a tariff war basically, with Uganda and the Eastern African countries over imported secondhand clothing. And we've threatened to heavily tax tariffs on coffee and tea coming out of Africa, because Uganda and Eastern African countries are no longer willing to accept our secondhand clothing, which the United States says will endanger at least 40,000 jobs. Whether or not this is the case, no one really knows. But the fact remains is that the reason these countries are wanting to stop the import is so that they can establish their own manufacturing in the countries. They can begin manufacturing their own clothing and become more independent. And other countries the international community is firing back against this passing of tariffs by threatening other things that make them internationally secure. So for me, it's just a case of where we're really not thinking about what is best for making Uganda act in an independent fashion. And at the end of the day, if Uganda is more independent, it only improves the lives of the women of Uganda, because there is not only a vibrant economy, but there is also a government that is actively standing on their own 2 feet. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Uganda, and hopefully if you have any more questions, you will send me an email, because I'd be happy to go into greater detail.